She was known by the townspeople only as the woman at the end of the lane. Her small wooden cottage, nestled at the edge of a dying forest, hadn't seen a visitor in years. The windows were always shuttered, the gate always closed, the mailbox always empty. Children dared each other to peek through the fence, but they never went too close. Grown-ups spoke in hushed tones whenever her name came up, if it came up at all. And she, well, she never bothered anyone. Never called, never wrote, never stepped into town unless absolutely necessary. She kept to herself, and that's how she liked it. But there was a time, long ago, when she had a life filled with laughter. Before the silence, before the solitude, there was a family. A husband with strong hands and a gentle voice, a daughter who danced barefoot in the summer rain. A house filled with warm light and even warmer memories. That was before the accident, before the fire that left nothing but ashes where joy once stood. The day she buried her past, she also buried any desire for the future. She packed what was left of her belongings, moved far from the town she used to call home, and settled in the forest. No neighbors, no noise, no pain. Just the rustling of trees and the occasional cry of a night owl. That became her new world. Each morning she rose with the sun, fed her chickens, tended to a fading garden, and swept the porch even when no one would come. Her days passed in rhythm with the wind, her nights spent curled beside a fireplace whose flames could never compare to the warmth she had lost. She wrote letters she never mailed, set an extra plate at dinner she never used, and read books aloud to no one in particular. The routine became sacred. Not because it was comforting, but because it made her forget, if only for a while, that she was alone. Sometimes she would sit by the window, a cup of tea in her hand, and watch the seasons change. The golden leaves of fall that drifted across the path reminded her of her daughter's hair. The snowflakes that dusted her windowsill brought memories of cocoa and stories told under thick quilts. And in spring, when the earth came alive again, something inside her ached, because part of her longed to come alive too, but didn't know how. People whispered that she had gone mad. That maybe she talked to ghosts or wrote to people who weren't there. Maybe she did. But madness was easier than remembering. Madness kept her safe. She didn't need anyone to knock on her door. Didn't need voices echoing down her hallway. She had trained herself to find comfort in quiet, to find meaning in the mundane. And in a way, she thought she had finally escaped the cruelty of fate by simply refusing to live the life fate had left her with. But not all stories stay buried. Not all hearts stay closed forever. Somewhere deep inside, under years of silence, her soul still pulsed. Faintly. Softly. Like an ember refusing to die out completely. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would dream of laughter again, and when she woke, the house would feel colder. She would get up, make tea, and whisper apologies to the shadows. She never imagined that her routine, so carefully crafted, so meticulously guarded, would one day be interrupted. And not by ghosts from her past, but by a stranger. A knock. A question. A baby. A plea. Until that moment, she hadn't realized just how many years had passed. Or how much time had slipped away between her grief and the present. Time had a way of moving on, even when hearts didn't. Her home had become a time capsule, a monument to what once was. The dust on her bookshelves, the fading photos in cracked frames, the blanket folded on the chair, all reminders that life had paused, but the world had not. It was the kind of night that warned you something was coming. The clouds hung low and heavy, like they were holding back a storm that didn't want to wait. The wind had picked up steadily throughout the day, rattling the wind chimes on her porch and moaning through the eaves like an old ghost trying to get in. The forest that surrounded her home whispered in restless murmurs, leaves scraping the ground like footsteps. She had just finished locking the door, drawing the curtains shut like she did every evening, when she heard it. A sound she hadn't heard in years. Not animals. Not the wind. Not trees creaking. A knock. She stood still, cup of tea in hand, her heart frozen mid-beat. No one ever came this far down the road. Even delivery trucks turned around at the base of the hill. She hadn't had a visitor in over a decade. The knock came again, this time firmer, but not forceful. 3 short raps, then silence. For a moment she wondered if she imagined it. Maybe the wind had blown a branch against the siding. But there it was again, 3 soft knocks. A pause. Then a voice. "Hello. I'm sorry to bother you, please, can you help?" She froze. A woman's voice. Shaky. Hesitant. It wasn't angry or demanding, it was desperate. Against her better judgment, she moved slowly toward the door, her bare feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. She peered through the small side window, expecting, she didn't know what. A stranger with bad intentions. A scam. A trick. But what she saw was something else entirely. A young woman, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face. She clutched something close to her chest, at first just a bundle of blankets, but then the tiniest sound reached her ears. A whimper. A cry. A baby. The woman was holding a baby. Shivering, frightened, her eyes darting left and right like she was being followed. "I'm not here to cause trouble," the stranger said again, as if she sensed eyes on her. "We just need a place for one night. Just one." She didn't open the door right away. Instead, she stood with her hand on the knob, the weight of years pressing against her chest. Everything about this moment felt wrong. Out of place. Out of rhythm. For so long, she had kept her life sealed off from the outside world. And now, on a night when even the sky seemed to be holding its breath, someone had found her. Someone who needed her. Lightning lit up the sky behind the woman, casting a strange glow across her pale face. The baby cried again, a thin, piercing sound that shot straight through the door, through the walls, through the silence she had built like armor around herself. The woman shifted, rocking the child gently, whispering words that were swept away by the wind. She was young. She looked barely 20. There was something in her eyes, not just fear, but something deeper. Something broken. The woman inside the house stared at them, this mother and child standing at her doorstep like some forgotten dream. For years she had told herself she needed nothing. That the world beyond her trees had nothing left to offer her. That no one could understand her grief, or worse, try to fix it. But now, standing on the other side of her front door, was someone who had no one else. Someone with too many questions and not enough shelter. And they had come to her. The storm finally broke, thunder cracking like a whip across the sky. Rain began to fall in sheets, soaking the woman and child even more. Still, she didn't move from the porch. She just looked up, meeting the eyes of the older woman watching from the window. No words. No pleading. Just a silent, exhausted hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would let her in. The cry pierced through the thick walls of the cottage like an old memory clawing its way back to life. It wasn't loud, just a soft, desperate whimper, but it was enough. Enough to make her freeze halfway across the room. Enough to make her chest tighten and her fingers tremble. For a moment, she thought she was hearing things. That maybe the storm outside, mixed with the roar of old regrets, was playing tricks on her. But then it came again. A baby's cry. Real. Fragile. Echoing through the crack in the door she hadn't fully closed. She hadn't heard a sound like that in so many years. Not since the days when tiny feet had pitter-pattered across her wooden floor, when lullabies filled the nights, and when her own arms had known the weight of something so small, so alive. Back then, she hadn't needed to think, her body had moved on instinct. When her daughter cried, she had come running. She remembered it all, like a song her soul never forgot. The rhythm of holding, rocking, humming. The warmth of another heartbeat against her chest. The quiet joy in the middle of sleepless nights. She hadn't let herself remember those things in a long time. It was safer to keep those doors closed. To treat those memories like fragile antiques locked in the attic, dusty, untouched, and kept far out of reach. But the sound of that child, muffled by the wind and rain, cracked something in her. And what came spilling out wasn't just memory, it was longing. Raw, aching, and unexpected. She stepped closer to the door, her hand brushing the wood like it might bite her. The young woman on the porch was still there, hunched protectively over the bundle in her arms, shielding it from the storm. Her eyes were red, but not from the rain. She looked up again, and this time she didn't say anything. She just pressed her lips to the baby's forehead and closed her eyes, as if preparing for the worst. That image, the way she cradled the child, as if nothing else in the world mattered, stirred something too deep to name. The older woman's thoughts began to spiral. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she alone, on foot, in this weather, with a baby? There were so many questions, but only one answer that seemed to matter: she was here. And she wasn't alone. She had a child. A child that needed warmth, shelter, safety. Without meaning to, her feet moved forward. Her hand slowly unlatched the door, pulling it open just enough to let the wind slice into the house. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of wet leaves, pine, and something more, something human. The baby cried again, louder this time, as if pleading not just for food or sleep, but for someone to listen. Someone to answer. And the woman realized it wasn't just the baby crying, it was the sound of survival. Of vulnerability. Of life clinging to life. She stepped out onto the porch, the old wood creaking beneath her. The stranger's eyes widened slightly, unsure of what to expect. But there was no threat in her stance, no judgment in her gaze. Just the softest look of recognition, like seeing an old reflection in someone else's pain. She reached out slowly, not toward the woman, but toward the child. Her hands, once strong and steady, trembled as they hovered above the bundle. And then, almost without thinking, she brushed her fingers lightly against the baby's cheek. Warm. Soft. Real. The baby blinked up at her, hiccuping between cries, and for a single breath, the storm seemed to fade into the background. The stranger didn't pull away. Instead, she looked into the older woman's eyes, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding stitched together by exhaustion, fear, and something else. Something tender. The past and present folding in on themselves, held together by the smallest sound in the world. A baby's cry that somehow broke through the silence of years. The plan was to let them stay one night. Just one. She told herself it was only because of the storm, only because of the baby. It wasn't charity. It wasn't compassion. It was simply necessity. The mother looked like she hadn't eaten in days, her cheeks sunken, her eyes bloodshot. The baby was cold to the touch, his tiny fists clenching with every whimper. She couldn't in good conscience send them back into the downpour. So she opened the door wide and motioned them inside. That's all it was supposed to be, a night of shelter. Nothing more. But once the door closed and the quiet warmth of the house surrounded them, time shifted. The stranger sat by the fire, rocking the baby as the older woman brewed tea and ladled out warm stew from a pot she had made for herself earlier. She wasn't used to the sound of another voice in her home, but the young woman didn't speak much. She seemed too tired, too scared. They exchanged few words that first night, just what was necessary. A name. A thank you. A whispered apology for the intrusion. The baby, however, filled the room with soft cries and the occasional coo. That was the noise that seeped into the corners of the house, warming it more than the fire ever could. Morning came, but the storm hadn't passed. Sheets of rain still clung to the windows, and the road had turned to thick, impassable mud. The woman said nothing when the stranger asked to stay a little longer, just until the path dried. She nodded silently and added more water to the stew. That was how the second night came. And the third. And the fourth. With each passing day, the routine of the house subtly changed. Another cup placed on the table. Another chair pulled out. Another towel hung to dry. The sound of a baby's breath during naps. The soft lull of humming as the mother rocked her son near the hearth. It all began to feel oddly natural, like a life the older woman hadn't known she missed until it quietly returned. At night, she would find herself lingering in the hallway, listening to the rhythm of that baby's breathing through the cracked door, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She started noticing things about the young woman. How she flinched at sudden sounds. How she never let the baby out of her reach. How her eyes scanned every window as if she were waiting for something, or someone, to appear. The older woman didn't ask questions. Not yet. She knew what it was like to carry something too heavy to name. For now, it was enough that they were here. That the baby was warm. That the house wasn't silent anymore. The days bled into weeks. She began to look forward to the shared breakfasts, the soft laughter that occasionally escaped the mother's lips, the curious way the baby would reach for her finger with wide, trusting eyes. And when the baby cried in the middle of the night, she often found herself halfway down the hallway before the mother even stirred. Her arms, once foreign to comfort, now moved with surprising ease. She rocked the child like she had never stopped. She remembered how to soothe, how to sing, how to love in silence. The garden that had gone untended for years now had two sets of hands working in it. The porch, once swept out of habit, was now a place where someone else sat beside her, drinking tea in silence. One night, she noticed that the young woman had begun folding the laundry before being asked. Another night, she found the stew pot full before she could prepare dinner. Little signs. Quiet offerings. Like a family being built without words. She began to lose track of how many days had passed since that first knock. How many nights she had gone to sleep not alone. The house no longer felt like a monument to grief. It felt like something different. Not a return to the past, but the beginning of something else entirely. Something unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. It was during a quiet morning, when the mist still clung low over the trees, that she first noticed something was off. The young woman had gone out to gather herbs from the edge of the woods, something she'd started doing after learning the older woman still brewed teas from scratch. But this time, she was gone longer than usual. The baby, wrapped in a worn blue blanket, lay asleep in the crib they had assembled together from an old chest and a pile of quilts. She waited, pacing the living room, glancing at the window, convincing herself there was nothing to worry about. Still, a strange feeling sat low in her stomach, heavy and unwelcome. When the girl finally returned, her face was pale, her breath uneven. She smiled too quickly, said she had just lost track of time, but her hands were shaking. The older woman didn't press, not then. She only offered tea and a place by the fire. But that night, when the girl fell into a restless sleep, she noticed the thin scratch running down her arm. It wasn't deep, but it was fresh. When asked about it the next day, the girl shrugged it off and said it must have happened walking through brambles. The explanation was simple, but the way her voice trembled made it feel rehearsed. Days passed, and more signs appeared. A coat left by the door had a tear near the shoulder, like it had been grabbed. A muddy footprint outside the back window that didn't match either of theirs. A scarf that had been drying on the line vanished overnight. The girl grew quieter, flinching at unexpected noises, always looking over her shoulder when they walked in the woods. She never said what she feared, but fear was there, in her eyes, in the way she clutched her baby tighter at night, in the way she began sleeping with the chair propped under the doorknob even though they were miles from anyone. The older woman watched closely, observing the way the past clung to the girl's every move. She'd seen that kind of fear before, in herself, long ago. A kind of fear that didn't just come from one bad night, but from many. The girl was hiding something. Not just fear, but truth. Something unspoken, something that lived in the shadows behind her polite thank yous and gentle smiles. There were moments when the weight of it almost broke through. Like the time the baby cried and wouldn't stop, and the girl held him too tightly, whispering over and over, it's okay, he can't find us here. Or when a dog barked in the distance and she dropped the plate in her hand, shaking so hard she couldn't pick up the pieces. Still, no questions were asked. Not yet. There was trust between them, but it was still fragile, like glass resting on a ledge. The older woman knew it would take time, that rushing would only push the truth further into hiding. So she waited. She offered comfort in silence, stability through routine. She cooked, she cleaned, she sang softly when rocking the baby to sleep. All the while, the girl began to lean into her presence more. Not just with her chores or in the quiet of shared meals, but in the rare moments when her guard dropped and her voice cracked and something close to pain flickered in her words. Eventually, pieces of the truth began to slip through, not as confessions, but as fragments. A name muttered in her sleep. A bruise on her shoulder she tried to cover with her hair. A journal left open on the table with a few lines scribbled in shaky handwriting, he doesn't know where we are. He can't. I just need more time. That was when the older woman understood. The girl wasn't just lost. She wasn't just passing through. She was running. From someone. From something. And whatever it wasn't far behind. The feeling that had first come with that knock on the door had changed. What began as a simple act of kindness now carried the weight of something deeper. Protection. Refuge. The realization settled slowly but undeniably, this girl had not arrived by accident. And the danger she carried with her hadn't stayed behind. The days had stretched into weeks, and the weeks into something more permanent. What started as a silent agreement to provide shelter had turned into something unspoken but undeniable. The house, once a monument to solitude, now breathed with new life. The sound of footsteps on the floorboards, the smell of baby powder and warm meals, the quiet rhythm of lullabies hummed at dusk, it all formed a new pattern, one that neither woman had expected but both had settled into without resistance. It was in the little things that the shift became most apparent. The way the older woman caught herself smiling as the baby babbled nonsense while crawling across the living room rug. The way the girl, once so guarded, now let out soft laughter while drying dishes. There were still shadows behind her eyes, still moments when she would stare out the window longer than usual, lost in thoughts she never spoke aloud. But she no longer looked like someone running. She looked like someone trying to begin again. One morning, while folding clothes by the fire, the young woman turned and asked a question that made the older woman pause, "Did you always live alone?" It was the first personal question she had ever asked. Not out of curiosity, but out of a desire to understand. The older woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared into the flames, remembering birthdays that had passed in silence, holidays that came and went without notice, and long nights spent talking to a photograph that never answered back. She gave a small nod, then added, "Not always." That one moment cracked something open. Slowly, bit by bit, the two began to exchange more than just chores and passing conversation. Stories began to emerge, shared in hushed tones late at night over tea or while peeling vegetables side by side. The girl spoke of her childhood, briefly, carefully. The older woman spoke of her daughter, of how she used to sing to the birds and wear her mother's boots to play in the garden. The stories were quiet, hesitant at first, but they wove an invisible thread between them. There was something sacred in the way they never pushed each other for details. The girl never asked about the fire that had taken everything. The woman never demanded to know the full truth about the man the girl feared. They shared enough to understand one another's silences. And that was enough. One day, the girl placed the baby in the older woman's arms and said, "He sleeps better with you." The trust in that gesture made her chest tighten. She hadn't held a child like that in so long, a family, not one she'd been born into, not even one she'd chosen, but one that had arrived on her doorstep and grown into her life with gentle persistence. The fear that once hovered over the girl began to fade, replaced by cautious peace. The woman who once needed no one began to feel the absence of them in moments they stepped out for walks or errands. It wasn't dramatic, or sudden. It was slow, like the changing seasons. The kind of change you don't notice until the air feels different, until the trees have new leaves. Until the house, once cold and still, hums with warmth.